I never thought I'd be the kind of guy to get mixed up in something like this. I'm just a night watchman, you know? My job is to make sure the labs at Novatech Research Facility stay locked up tight and that no one's sneaking around after hours. It's not glamorous work, but it pays the bills, and it's quiet. Or at least it was quiet. Until last night. The facility is a sprawling complex on the edge of the desert, about an hour outside of town. It's one of those places where they do all kinds of high-tech research, nanotechnology, quantum computing, stuff I don't even pretend to understand. My beat is the Advanced Physics Wing, a cluster of labs tucked away in the northwest corner of the complex. Most nights, it's dead silent. The scientists clock out by 8 p.m., and I'm left alone with my flashlight and my thoughts. Last night started like any other. I was making my rounds, checking doors, and jotting down notes in my logbook. Around 11 p.m., I was in the hallway outside Lab 7 when I heard it. A low hum, like the sound of a power generator, but deeper, more resonant. It wasn't coming from the lab itself, but from the room next to it. Lab 8. That was strange. Lab 8 had been locked up for months. The rumor was the project they were working on in there got shut down after some kind of accident. No one ever talked about it, and I never asked. Not my business. But the hum was unmistakable. And then there was the light, a faint, pulsating glow seeping out from under the door. I hesitated. My job was to report anything unusual, but something about that light made my skin crawl. I stood there for a good minute, debating whether to call it in or just walk away. Curiosity got the better of me. I pulled out my master keycard and swiped it. The door hissed open, and the hum grew louder. The room was dimly lit, but I could see enough to make my stomach turn. The walls were covered in strange symbols, not equations or diagrams, but something else. They looked almost like writing, but not in any language I'd ever seen. The symbols seemed to shift and writhe under the flickering light, like they were alive. In the center of the room was a machine. It was hard to describe, a massive cylindrical structure made of polished metal with coils of wire snaking around it like veins. At its core was a glass chamber, and inside that chamber was something. A swirling mass of black and silver, like liquid mercury, but it moved in ways that defied physics. It pulsed and rippled as if it were alive, and the hum seemed to be coming from it.
Hey, what are you doing in here?
I nearly jumped out of my skin. I turned to see a man in a lab coat standing in the doorway. He was tall, with sharp features and piercing blue eyes. His hair was a mess, like he'd been running his hands through it all night. He looked exhausted, but there was a wild energy in his eyes that made me nervous. I'm the night watchman, I stammered. I heard a noise, and I saw the light.
You shouldn't be here,
he said, cutting me off. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it.
This lab is off limits. You need to leave, now.
I nodded and started backing toward the door, but something stopped me. What is that thing? I asked, pointing to the machine. The man hesitated, then sighed.
It's called the Eidolon Array,
he said.
It's hard to explain. Let's just say it's a window.
A window, I repeated. To where? He didn't answer. Instead, he walked over to the machine and placed his hand on the glass chamber. The swirling mass inside seemed to react, pulsing faster, almost like it recognized him.
You ever wonder what's out there?
He asked, his voice barely above a whisper.
Beyond the stars? Beyond the edges of the universe? The things we can't see, we can't even imagine?
I didn't know what to say. The way he was talking, the way he was looking at that thing, it sent a chill down my spine. Listen, I should probably go, I said, taking another step back.
Wait,
he said, turning to face me.
I could use your help.
My help? I asked, incredulous. With what?
The experiment. It's almost ready. I just need someone to monitor things while I'm inside.
Inside? I repeated. Inside where? He smiled, but it wasn't a comforting smile. It was the kind of smile that made you feel like you were standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down.
The other side.
He said.
The place beyond the window.
I shook my head. No way. I'm not getting involved in this. Whatever you're doing, it's way above my pay grade.
I'll make it worth your while,
he said, pulling out a checkbook.
$5,000. All you have to do is stand here and watch. If anything goes wrong, you pull this lever.
He pointed to a large red lever on the side of the machine.
That's it. Easy money.
I hesitated. $5,000 was a lot of money. It would cover my rent for months. But something about this whole setup felt wrong. The symbols on the walls, the thing in the glass chamber, and the way the man was looking at me, it all set off alarm bells in my head. What's your name? I asked, stalling for time.
Dr. Elias Voss.
He said.
And you are?
Jack, I said. Jack Morrow.
Well, Jack,
he said, holding out the check.
What do you say? Are you in?
I looked at the check, then at the machine, then back at him. What happens if I don't pull the lever? I asked. His smile faded.
Then I don't come back. And neither does anyone else.
I stared at the check in my hand, the numbers $5,000 glaring back at me. It felt heavy, like it carried more weight than just paper and ink. My gut was screaming at me to walk away, but my brain was doing the math. $5,000. That was more than I made in a month. And all I had to do was stand there and pull a lever if something went wrong. How bad could it be? All right, I said, folding the check and slipping it into my pocket. But if this thing goes sideways, I'm out of here, got it? Dr. Voss nodded, his expression unreadable.
Understood. Now, let's get started.
He walked over to a control panel on the side of the machine and began flipping switches. The hum grew louder, vibrating through the floor and into my bones. The swirling mass inside the glass chamber pulsed faster, its movements becoming more erratic. The symbols on the walls seemed to glow brighter, their shifting patterns making me dizzy. What exactly am I watching for? I asked, raising my voice over the noise.
If the array destabilizes, the readings on this monitor will spike,
he said, pointing to a screen filled with graphs and numbers I didn't understand.
If that happens, pull the lever immediately. It will shut down the array and close the window.
Close the window? I repeated. What happens if you're still on the other side? He didn't answer. Instead, he opened a small compartment on the side of the machine and pulled out a strange-looking suit. It was made of some kind of metallic fabric with wires running through it like veins. He began putting it on, his movements quick and practiced. You're really going in there? I asked, my voice tinged with disbelief.
I have to,
he said, his tone final.
This is the culmination of years of research. I need to see what's on the other side.
And if it's, I don't know, dangerous? He paused, his hands hovering over the zipper of the suit.
Then you'll know what to do,
he said, nodding toward the lever. Before I could say anything else, he stepped into the machine. The glass chamber hissed open, and he climbed inside. The swirling mass seemed to part around him, like water, and then he was gone, swallowed up by the darkness. The hum grew deafening, and the lights in the room flickered. The monitor beside me started beeping, the graphs spiking and dipping erratically. I glanced at the lever, my hand hovering over it. What the hell had I gotten myself into? Minutes passed. The machine continued to hum, the symbols on the walls glowing brighter and brighter. I kept my eyes glued to the monitor, waiting for something to happen. but the readings stayed steady, and the machine showed no signs of destabilizing. Maybe this wasn't so bad after all. Then, without warning, the monitor spiked. The graphs shot off the charts and the beeping turned into a shrill alarm. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. This was it. This was what he'd warned me about. I reached for the lever, but something stopped me. What if he was still in there? What if pulling the lever trapped him on the other side? I hesitated, my hand trembling. "Come on, Jack," I muttered to myself. "You're just the night watchman. This isn't your problem." But it was my problem. I'd taken the money. I'd agreed to this. And now I had to make a choice. I grabbed the lever and pulled. The machine shuddered, the hum dropping to a low growl. The symbols on the walls dimmed, and the swirling mass in the glass chamber slowed, its movements becoming sluggish. For a moment, everything seemed to stabilize. Then the glass chamber exploded. I ducked, shielding my face as shards of glass rained down around me. When I looked up, the machine was sparking and smoking, the metal coils glowing red hot, and standing in the middle of it all was Dr. Voss. But it wasn't him. Not really. His suit was torn, the metallic fabric hanging off him in shreds. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and his eyes were wrong. They were too big, too dark, like voids that swallowed the light. And his mouth, it was twisted into a grin that stretched too wide, showing too many teeth.
"Jack,"
he said, his voice echoing unnaturally.
"you shouldn't have done that."
I stumbled back, my heart racing. What happened to you?" He tilted his head, his grin widening.
"I saw it, Jack. I saw the other side. It's beautiful and terrible, and it's coming."
"What's coming?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped out of the machine, his movements jerky and unnatural. The symbols on the walls began to glow again, their patterns shifting faster, more chaotically. The air in the room grew heavy, pressing down on me like a weight. "We have to go," I said, backing toward the door. "We have to get out of here,"
"There's no escaping it."
he said, his voice echoing in my mind.
"It's already here."
I turned and ran, slamming the door shut behind me. I didn't stop until I was outside, gasping for breath in the cool night air. My hands were shaking, and my mind was racing. What the hell had just happened, and what had he brought back with him? I pulled out my radio and called security. "This is Jack Morrow in the Advanced Physics Wing. We've got a situation. I need backup now." The response was immediate. "Copy that, Jack. We're on our way." I stood there, staring at the building, waiting for the others to arrive. But deep down, I knew it was already too late. Whatever Dr. Voss had seen on the other side, it wasn't staying there. And now, it was here. The security team arrived within minutes, their flashlights cutting through the darkness as they approached the building. I met them at the entrance, my hands still shaking, my mind racing. I tried to explain what had happened, but the words came out in a jumbled mess. Dr. Voss, the machine, the other side. None of it made sense, even to me.
"Slow down, Jack,"
said Greg, the head of security. He was a big guy, ex-military, with a no-nonsense attitude.
"Start from the beginning."
I took a deep breath and tried to organize my thoughts. Dr. Voss was running some kind of experiment in Lab 8. He went inside this machine, and when he came out, he wasn't the same. Something's wrong with him. Really wrong. Greg exchanged a look with the other guards.
"All right,
He said.
let's check it out. Stay behind us."
We moved through the building, the tension thick in the air. The hallway leading to Lab 8 was eerily quiet, the hum of the machine now replaced by an oppressive silence. The door to the lab was still closed, but the symbols on the walls outside were glowing faintly, their shifting patterns making my head spin. Greg tried the handle.
It's locked.
He said, pulling out his keycard. He swiped it, but the door didn't budge.
What the hell?
Let me try, I said, pulling out my master keycard. I swiped it, but the door remained sealed. It's not working.
Stand back.
Greg said, motioning for the others to move aside. He pulled out a small battering ram and slammed it into the door. Once, twice. On the third hit, the door flew open and we stepped inside. The lab was a disaster. The machine was sparking and smoking, the glass chamber shattered, and the symbols on the walls were glowing brighter than ever. But Dr. Voss was nowhere to be seen.
Spread out. Search the room.
The guards fanned out, their flashlights cutting through the dim light. I stayed near the door, my eyes scanning the room for any sign of movement. That's when I saw it, a trail of black sludge leading from the machine to the far wall. It looked like oil, but it moved, slithering across the floor like a snake. "Over here," one of the guards shouted. He was standing near a storage closet, his flashlight trained on something inside. We rushed over, and my stomach turned at what I saw. Dr. Voss was crouched in the corner of the closet, his body twisted at unnatural angles. His skin was pale and slick, like it was melting, and his eyes were completely black. He was muttering something under his breath, his voice low and guttural.
Dr. Voss?
Greg said, his voice cautious.
Can you hear me?
Voss's head snapped up, his black eyes locking onto Greg's.
It's coming,
he said, his voice echoing unnaturally.
There's no escaping it.
What's coming?
Greg asked, taking a step back. Voss didn't answer. Instead, he lunged. It happened so fast, I barely had time to react. One moment, Voss was crouched in the corner. The next, he was on top of Greg, his hands clawing at the guard's face. Greg screamed, thrashing wildly, but Voss was too strong. The other guards rushed forward, trying to pull him off, but it was like trying to move a statue. I backed away, my heart pounding in my chest. This wasn't Dr. Voss anymore. Whatever had come back with him from the other side, it had taken over. The guards managed to pull Voss off Greg, but not before he'd done serious damage. Greg's face was a bloody mess, his nose broken, his cheek torn open. "We need to restrain him," one of the guards shouted, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. "No!" I shouted, my voice cutting through the chaos. "Don't touch him! There's something wrong with him, something not human." The guards hesitated, and in that moment, Voss broke free. He moved like a predator, his body contorting in ways that shouldn't have been possible. He grabbed one of the guards by the throat and slammed him into the wall, the impact cracking the plaster. The other guard tried to tackle him, but Voss threw him off like he weighed nothing. Greg was on his feet now, blood streaming down his face.
We need to get out of here,
he shouted, his voice panicked. I didn't need to be told twice. I turned and ran, the others close behind me. We burst out of the lab and into the hallway, the sound of Voss's laughter echoing behind us. It wasn't a human laugh. It was something else, something dark and twisted. We didn't stop until we were outside, gasping for breath in the cool night air. Greg was on the radio, calling for backup, but I knew it wouldn't be enough. Whatever Voss had become, it wasn't something we could handle with guns and handcuffs. "What the hell was that?" one of the guards asked, his voice trembling. "I don't know," I said, my mind racing. "But we need to contain it. If it gets out of the building..." I didn't finish the sentence. I didn't need to. The look on their faces said it all. Backup arrived within minutes. More guards, armed with tasers and riot gear. They formed a perimeter around the building, their faces tense but determined. Greg, his face still bloody, was barking orders, trying to organize a plan. But I could see the fear in his eyes. He knew, just like I did, that this wasn't something we could handle with standard protocols.
We need to lock down the facility.
Greg said, his voice steady despite the chaos.
No one in or out until we contain this thing.
Contain it? One of the guards asked, his voice shaky. How the hell are we supposed to contain that? Greg didn't answer. He didn't have to. We all knew the truth. We were in over our heads. I pulled Greg aside, my voice low. We need to call someone who knows what they're dealing with. This isn't just some rogue scientist. Whatever's in there, it's not human. Greg nodded, his jaw tight. We moved back to the entrance, the guards forming a tight circle around the door. The building was eerily quiet, the only sound the faint hum of the emergency lights. But I could feel it, the presence inside, waiting, watching. It was like the air itself was alive, pulsing with a malevolent energy. Then the door burst open. Voss, or what was left of him, stood in the doorway, his body twisted and grotesque. His skin was slick and black, like oil, and his eyes glowed with an unnatural light. He moved with a jerky, unnatural gait, his limbs bending in ways that made my stomach turn.
Open fire,
Greg shouted. The guards unleashed a barrage of taser darts, the wires crackling as they struck Voss's body. But he didn't go down, he didn't even flinch. Instead, he reached up and ripped the darts out, his grin widening as he stepped forward.
Fall back,
Greg shouted, his voice panicked now.
Fall back.
We retreated, the guards firing wildly as we moved. But it was no use. Voss was unstoppable. He moved through the crowd like a predator, his claws tearing through flesh and bone with terrifying ease. The screams were deafening, the sound of chaos and death. I ran, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know where I was going, I just knew I had to get away. But as I turned a corner, I saw something that stopped me cold. The black sludge. It was everywhere, oozing out of the walls, the floor, the ceiling. It moved like a living thing, spreading rapidly, consuming everything in its path. And where it touched, the building changed. The walls warped and twisted, the symbols glowing brighter, their patterns shifting faster. It was like the building itself was coming alive. I backed away, my mind racing. This wasn't just about Voss anymore. Whatever had come through the machine, it was spreading. And if we didn't stop it, it would consume everything. I found Greg in the control room, his face pale and drawn. He was on the phone, his voice frantic.
I don't care what it takes. Just get someone here now.
Greg, I said, my voice trembling. It's not just Voss, the whole building. It's infected. He turned to me, his eyes wide with fear.
What are you talking about?
The sludge, I said. It's everywhere, and it's spreading. We need to evacuate, now. Greg hesitated, then nodded.
All right. We'll pull everyone out and seal the building, but we need to buy time until the corporate team gets here.
We moved quickly, rounding up the remaining guards and staff and herding them toward the exits. The sludge was spreading faster now, the building groaning and creaking as it twisted and warped. The air was thick with the smell of rot and decay, and the symbols on the walls were glowing so brightly it hurt to look at them. As we reached the main entrance, I turned back for one last look. The building was unrecognizable, its walls pulsating with a sickly light. And in the center of it all, standing in the doorway, was Voss. His body was almost completely consumed by the sludge, his form shifting and changing, becoming something else.
Go,
Greg shouted, shoving me toward the exit.
get out of here.
I didn't need to be told twice. I ran, the sound of the building collapsing behind me. I didn't stop until I was outside, gasping for breath in the cool night air. The others were already there, their faces pale and terrified. Greg was the last one out, slamming the door shut behind him.
Seal it. Now.
The guards moved quickly, welding the doors shut and setting up barricades. But I knew it wouldn't be enough. Whatever was inside that building, it wasn't staying there. The corporate team arrived just before dawn. They came in unmarked black vans, their faces hidden behind masks and their movements precise and efficient. They didn't say much, just ordered us to stay back as they set up a perimeter around the building. I watched from a distance, my heart pounding as they unloaded strange equipment, things I couldn't even begin to understand. Greg stood beside me, his face still bloody, but bandaged now.
They'll handle it,
He said, though he didn't sound convinced. Handle it how? I asked. What is that thing? He didn't answer. He didn't need to. We both knew the truth. This was bigger than any of us. The corporate team moved quickly, setting up what looked like a massive generator near the building. They attached cables to it, running them toward the entrance. One of them, a woman in a white hazmat suit, approached us, her voice calm but firm.
We need you to stay back.
She said.
This area is no longer safe.
What are you going to do? I asked.
Contain the anomaly.
She said, her tone leaving no room for argument.
Please move to the safe zone.
We did as we were told, retreating to a makeshift barricade 100 yards away. From there, we watched as the team worked, their movements quick and efficient. The generator hummed to life, the sound growing louder and louder until it was almost deafening. Then, without warning, the building exploded. It wasn't a normal explosion. There was no fire, no smoke. Instead, the building seemed to collapse in on itself, the walls folding like paper. The air around it shimmered, like heat rising off asphalt. And for a moment, I thought I saw something. A shape, massive and incomprehensible, looming in the space where the building had been. Then it was gone, and all that remained was a gaping hole in the ground. The corporate team moved in immediately, setting up more equipment around the hole. The woman in the hazmat suit approached us again, her expression unreadable behind her mask.
It's done,
She said.
The anomaly has been contained.
Contained?
Greg asked, his voice sharp.
What does that mean? What the hell was that thing?
She hesitated, then sighed.
The Eidolon array was designed to open a gateway to another dimension. Dr. Voss believed he could control it, but he was wrong. What he brought back, it was never meant to exist in our world.
So it's gone? I asked, my voice trembling. It's over?
For now.
She said.
But the gateway is still there, buried beneath the ground. We'll monitor it and ensure it stays closed. But you need to understand, this isn't over. Not really.
Her words sent a chill down my spine. What do you mean? She didn't answer. Instead, she turned and walked away, leaving us standing there in stunned silence. It's been 3 months since that night. The hole where the building once stood has been filled in, and a new facility has been built over it. A research center, they call it, though no one's allowed inside. The corporate team is still there, monitoring the site, but they don't talk to us. Not anymore. Greg quit a week after the incident. He said he couldn't sleep, that he kept hearing Voss's voice in his dreams. I don't blame him. I hear it too sometimes. That low, guttural laugh, echoing in the back of my mind. I stayed on, though. I don't know why. Maybe it's because I feel like I owe it to the others, to Greg, to the guards who didn't make it out. Or maybe it's because I'm afraid of what might happen if I leave. The nightmares are the worst. I see the building collapsing, the walls folding in on themselves. I see the shape in the air, massive and incomprehensible, its form shifting and changing. And I see Voss, his black eyes gleaming, his two wide grins stretching across his face. It's coming, he whispers in my dreams. It's already here. I don't know what he means. I don't want to know, but deep down, I can't shake the feeling that he's right. That whatever came through the gateway, it's still out there, waiting. And one day, it's going to find its way back.